I found out my husband was already dead. The man I married was his brother. The death certificate was tucked inside a folder I was never supposed to open. It was a Tuesday, ordinary in every way that matters. Morning light coming through the curtains at the same angle it always did. The smell of groundnut soup still in the air from the night before. My daughter Amara singing something tuneless to herself in the next room. I was looking for the car insurance document, that was all. Just the insurance document, because the renewal reminder had come, and Kelechi always kept papers in the bottom drawer of the reading cabinet, the one with the sticky handle that you had to lift slightly before pulling. I found the insurance document, and underneath it, in a brown envelope that had been there long enough for the edges to curl, I found a death certificate. The name on it was Kelechi Adaora Mwachukwu, my husband's name. Date of death, March 14th, 2019. I checked the date on my phone. It was February 2022. We had been married for 3 years. Our daughter was 18 months old. I sat down on the floor of that study, in my house, in the life I had built, and I held a document that said the man I had married had been dead for almost 5 years. Let me tell you about the man I thought I knew. I met Kelechi at a mutual friend's birthday gathering in Lekki, one of those rooftop parties where the Lagos skyline looks close enough to touch, and everyone is performing a version of themselves they've been rehearsing since they left their family homes. He was not the most attractive man in the room. He was not the loudest. He stood near the railing with a drink he was barely touching, watching the water in the distance, and something about his stillness made me cross the room to stand beside him. He had a quiet intelligence, the kind that doesn't announce itself. He listened more than he spoke, and when he spoke, it was deliberate, each word placed like he'd already considered and discarded a dozen others. He worked in maritime logistics, he said, had been based in Port Harcourt for years, only recently relocated to Lagos. He had a particular way of pausing before answering personal questions, a half-second delay that I interpreted at the time as thoughtfulness. I know now what it was. We dated for 14 months, married at a small ceremony in Enugu. His insistence. He said he was a private man. He said his family was complicated, that they were estranged in the way that families sometimes become after tragedy, that he would rather begin our life as its own thing rather than dragging old conflicts into it. I understood that, or thought I did. My own family had its fractures. I didn't push. His friends were few, his phone was always quiet. When I asked about his childhood, about Enugu, about his parents, he was forthcoming enough, stories, details, a memory or two offered willingly, but there was always, underneath the surface of his answers, a door that was closed, not with a lock, but with a silence so practiced it felt like a wall. I told myself that was just him. That intimacy is not a light switch, that some people open slowly over years, and that was fine. 3 years in, a daughter, a house, a life that felt, most mornings, like enough. And then the folder, and then the floor. I did not call him. That is the first thing I want to be clear about. My first instinct was not to call the man downstairs making tea, not to storm into the kitchen holding the death certificate aloft, not to do any of the things a woman does in films when she discovers something shattering. My first instinct was to sit very still and think. I am a finance analyst by training. I do not move on incomplete information. I needed to understand what I was holding before I decided what to do with it. So I sat on the floor of the study for close to 20 minutes. Then I put the document back in the envelope, put the envelope back under the insurance papers, closed the drawer. Went downstairs. He was in the kitchen, white t-shirt, the kettle just clicked off, humming something low. He turned when he heard me and smiled. That particular smile, the one that reached his left eye faster than his right, the one I had kissed 1,000 times. I said, I found the insurance document. He said, finally, I've been meaning to sort that drawer for months. I said, I know. I sat at the table. I watched him pour my tea. I watched his hands, steady, unhurried, the hands of a man with no particular anxiety on a Tuesday morning. And I thought, who are you? If you are watching this and your heart is already in your throat, you are exactly where this story needs you. Subscribe if you haven't. What comes next will change everything you think you've understood. I am a methodical person, so I was methodical. Over the following 6 days, 6 days of cooking his food, sleeping beside him, watching him read to Amara before bed, 6 days of the most exhausting performance of normalcy I have ever undertaken, I pulled at every thread I could find. I searched his name online, Kelechi Adaora Nwachukwu, Port Harcourt, Maritime Logistics. There were results, a LinkedIn profile, some old company mentions, a photograph from a maritime industry conference in 2017. But the photograph was small and slightly blurred, and the man in it was similar enough to my husband to be consistent, but too low resolution to be definitive. I searched the death, found a short obituary in a Port Harcourt newspaper from March 2019. Kelechi Adaora Nwachukwu, 34 years, survived by his parents and a brother, died following a road traffic accident on the Aba Expressway. No photograph. A brother. I read that word several times. A brother. I tried to remember everything Kelechi had ever told me about siblings. He had mentioned once, early in our relationship, that he had a younger brother with whom he was not close, that the brother had gone abroad, that they had lost contact. He said it the way he said all personal things, factually, without embellishment, quickly, moving past it. A younger brother. Or an older brother. I realized sitting at my desk with that obituary on my screen that I did not actually know. I did not know the brother's name, his age, whether he was younger or older, nothing. Because I had asked questions that were answered just enough to satisfy, and then the conversation always moved on. On the 6th day, I called a private investigator. His name was Okafor, a former police detective recommended by a colleague who had once used him for a corporate matter. I told him what I needed. I told him to be fast. He called back in 9 days. Those 9 days were the longest of my life. Understand, I was not certain of anything. The death certificate could be a different Kelechi Nwachukwu. It was not an impossible name. The obituary could be a coincidence. There could be an explanation that I had not thought of, something administrative, something that would make sense once I heard it from him directly. But I could not ask him directly, not yet, because if I was wrong, the accusation alone would damage something between us that I was not sure could be repaired. And if I was right, I needed to be armed with everything before I walked into that conversation. So I waited, and I watched him. I watched him in a way I never had before. Not with love's softening lens, but with the clear, uncomfortable focus of someone who is genuinely trying to see. And what I saw was a man who was, by every surface measure, exactly who he had always been. Attentive, calm, good with our daughter, not demonstratively lying, not visibly anxious. But once, on the 4th evening, he took a phone call in the garden, stood with his back to the house. I couldn't hear the words, only the register, low and clipped, the tone of a man controlling something. He came back in and said it was work. I nodded, and on the 7th day, I found something else. I was not snooping, or rather, I was snooping in a way that was indistinguishable from ordinary domestic life. I was doing laundry. His jacket pocket. A small folded piece of paper that might have been a receipt or a note or nothing. It was a note. Handwritten. 4 words. It cannot go on. No name, no context. It could mean anything. It could mean nothing. I folded it back exactly as I'd found it and put it in the pocket and finished the laundry. Okafor called on a Thursday morning while Kelechi was at work and Amara was at her aunt's. He confirmed what I already half knew and half refused to know. Kelechi Adaora Nwachukwu had died in March 2019. Road accident on Aba Expressway. Her younger brother, Tobechukwu Nwachukwu, called Tobe, had been in the car. Tobe had survived with a fractured collarbone and a concussion. Kelechi had not survived. Their parents were both deceased. Their father had died in 2016, their mother in 2018, just months before the accident. There were no other close relatives. Tobe had been, at the time of his brother's death, 31 years old, working in shipping administration in Port Harcourt at a smaller firm than the one Kelechi had worked for. Less successful, Okafor said. The brothers had been close once but had drifted. Professional jealousy, according to a former colleague Okafor had spoken with, the specific kind that forms between brothers when one thrives and one doesn't. After Kelechi's death, Tobe had disappeared from Port Harcourt, simply stopped showing up to work, left his apartment, gone. He reappeared months later in Lagos as Kelechi. Okafor sent me documents, photographs. A photograph of Tobe from 2017 at a family event, a cousin's wedding dug up from someone's Facebook archive. The man in the photograph had his brother's bone structure, his brother's height, a similar quality of stillness in how he held himself. He also had a smile that reached his left eye faster than his right. I sat with my phone in my lap for a very long time. Then I called my sister Ifunanya and told her to come. Ifunanya arrived at 4 p.m. She is 4 years older than me, a woman who processes shock in the same way she processes everything, briskly, practically, with her feelings packed neatly away for later. I told her everything, showed her the documents, showed her Okafor's photographs. She said nothing for almost 5 minutes. Then she said, "Does he love you?" I stared at her. "Are you asking me that right now?" "I'm asking you," she said, "because the answer changes what you do next." I said, "I don't know who he is. How can I know whether what I've been receiving is love or a performance of love?" She said, "Those are not always different things." I told her I needed her to leave because I needed to think, and she was complicating my thinking. She laughed, which was exactly the wrong response and also exactly what I needed. She hugged me and said she would be at the end of the phone. He came home at 6:30. He kissed my cheek in the doorway, said traffic was terrible, asked what was for dinner. And I thought, tonight, I will do it tonight. I couldn't. Amara needed bathing, there was dinner, she wanted her father to read to her. Her father, God help me, and I sat in the doorway of her room and watched this man who was not who he said he was, reading to our daughter in a voice she trusted completely. And I thought about what the truth would do to her life, and I could not make myself speak. I waited one more day. There's something I have to tell you about that last night before everything broke open. He reached for my hand in the dark. We were lying in bed, and he reached for my hand and held it the way he always did, loosely, fingers threaded through mine, not demanding anything, just there. And I let him hold it because to pull away would have required an explanation I wasn't ready to give. But I lay there in the dark with my hand in his, and I thought, who lost his brother? This man, lying here, however much he has lied, lost his only brother. His only parent was already gone. He drove away from a wreck on the Aba Expressway with a fractured bone and a dead brother, and he came back as someone else. I did not know what that meant about his grief, or his sanity, or his capacity for love, but I knew it meant something. I knew there was a person under the lie who had been through something that I could not, lying there in the dark, fully imagine. This did not forgive him, but it complicated him, and I have always been uncomfortable with uncomplicated villainy. The next morning, after Amara left for daycare, I went to the kitchen and sat down at the table across from him. I said, "Tell me your brother's name." He was reading something on his phone. He looked up at the question, not immediately, just curious. "My brother," he said. "I told you we went—" "His name," I said. Something shifted in his face, a small but irreversible shift, like a key turning. He said Kelechi. The word sat between us, his dead brother's name, his own stolen name. I put the death certificate on the table. He looked at it for a long time. He did not reach for it. He did not speak. He sat completely still. That stillness I had always interpreted as calm, understanding now that it was something else, the physical habit of a man who had spent years training himself not to react, because reacting meant revealing. I said, "Tell me your actual name." He closed his eyes. I said, "Tell me your name, your real one." "Tobe Chuku." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Tobe." The name landed strangely, both completely foreign and somehow not. It suited him, or rather, it suited the part of him that had never quite fitted the name Kelechi. I said, "Start from the beginning." "Subscribe. I need you here for what he told her next." He talked for almost 2 hours. His voice was flat at first, the voice of a man making a confession he has been rehearsing and dreading simultaneously. Then it loosened. Then it broke in places, and he did not apologize for the breaking. He and Kelechi had not spoken properly in almost 2 years before the accident. Tobe had believed for most of his adult life that he was living in his brother's shadow, that his brother's success, his brother's status, even his brother's effortless way with people had taken up all the space that might have been Tobe's. He was smaller in the world than Kelechi. He had always been smaller. The accident happened on a road they had driven 100 times. They were coming from a distant relative's burial, had spoken in the car tentatively for the first time in months. Kelechi had said he was sorry. About what exactly, the conversation had not yet reached when the tanker came across the divider. Kelechi died at the scene. Tobe was alive, and in the hospital, in the hours after, he had made a decision that he has never been able to fully explain, not to the investigator, not to me, perhaps not even to himself. He was his brother's next of kin. He had access to Kelechi's phone, his documents, his apartment in Port Harcourt, his accounts. They looked alike. Everyone had always said so. His brother was dead, and there was no one left to notice. Their parents were gone. The handful of relatives that remained were distant. Kelechi's colleagues in Port Harcourt knew him professionally but not intimately. And Tobe, in the wreckage of grief and guilt and perhaps something darker, something he has never named out loud, stepped into his brother's life like you step into a dead man's coat. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself he would sort himself out, find his footing, step back. He moved to Lagos where no one knew either of them. He took meetings as Kelechi, signed documents as Kelechi, slowly inhabited the shape of a life that had not been his. And then he met me. He said, "I meant to tell you early, before it became something real. I kept telling myself the next time I saw you would be the time I told you the truth." I said, "And instead?" "Instead, I fell in love with you, and the longer I waited, the more impossible the telling became." I said, "You married me with your dead brother's name." "Yes." "Our daughter has a dead man's name on her birth certificate." He said nothing, because there was nothing to say. I said, "The note in your jacket, it cannot go on. Who were you writing to?" He looked at me. He said, "Myself. I write things to myself sometimes when I am trying to decide something." I thought about a man writing 4 words to himself in secret on a piece of paper, folded small enough to hide in a jacket pocket. I thought about what kind of loneliness produces that. I stood up. I walked to the window. Outside, the street was entirely ordinary. A woman selling tomatoes, a child on a bicycle, someone's generator running. I said, "Get out of this house." He went to his sister's, or rather, and this is important, to the cousin he had been calling his sister, a woman named Uju who lived in Surulere and who, it turned out, knew everything, had known since the beginning, had watched him build this life and had said periodically that it needed to end. She was the one who sent the note, not him to himself, her to him, delivered presumably through some method that left no digital trail, because Uju, I would later learn, was careful. When Okafor told me this, I sat with the rearrangement of it for a long time. Even the 4 words I had interpreted as his private confession were not his. Every layer I peeled back revealed another layer. He stayed away 11 days. During those 11 days, I spoke to a lawyer. I spoke to Ifunanya every day. I did not speak to Amara about any of it because she was 18 months old and her vocabulary consisted largely of the word daddy, deployed at maximum frequency and emotional power. The legal situation was complicated in ways I will not go into fully here. A marriage conducted under a false identity. A child registered under that identity. Questions about what was real, what was void, what was recoverable. The lawyer spoke to me calmly, and I took notes and then went home and cried in the shower with the water running, so Amara wouldn't hear. Ifunanya asked me twice during those 11 days what I wanted. Not what the law said, not what made sense, what I wanted. I did not have an answer. Because here's the thing that nobody tells you about being deceived by someone you love. The love does not automatically evacuate. It does not receive the news of the deception and say, right, that's enough, I'll be leaving now. It stays. It stays stupidly, stubbornly, inconveniently. It sits in the chest alongside the betrayal and the fury and the humiliation, and it refuses to be simple. I was furious at him. I also missed him in a way that shamed me. These 2 things were both true. They did not cancel each other out. He called on the 11th day, asked if he could see Amara. I said yes, because she was asking for him, and I am not the kind of woman who uses a child as a weapon, not even in the worst moments. I told him to come at 4, to be gone by 6. He arrived with a small bag of things for her favorite biscuits, a drawing book she'd been asking for. She ran to him at the door with the full-bodied, absolute certainty of a toddler who has no reason to doubt that love is constant. He held her, and I watched his face do something I had not seen on it before. It broke. Not dramatically, he didn't cry in front of her, but something in his jaw, his shoulders, some structural holding released, and I could see for the first time the weight of everything he had been carrying. Not just in the 3 years we had been together, but since the Aba Expressway, since the hospital, since the moment he had made a decision in grief that he could never fully take back. He played with her on the sitting room floor. I sat in the armchair and watched. At 5:30, she fell asleep against his chest, the way children do, instantly, completely, trusting in the total absence of self-preservation. He looked at me over her sleeping head. He said, "I know you cannot forgive this." I said, "I don't know what I can or cannot do yet." He said, "I need you to know one thing. Whatever I took from my brother, whatever I became, the love for you and for her, I have no other name to give it except real." I said, "You don't even have your own name to give things." It was cruel. I said it anyway. Some cruelties are just true. There is a thing that happened 3 weeks later that I have not told many people. I found Kelechi. Not literally, but I found him, the real him, in the way you find a person who is gone. I searched him properly this time. Not the death, not the accident, but the man. His LinkedIn page with his face clearly visible, his company profile from 2018, a YouTube video from a maritime industry panel where he had spoken, the camera close enough to see his eyes. I watched that video 4 times. He was not my husband. He moved differently, more expansive, more immediately warm, the kind of man who laughs quickly. He had the same bone structure, but he wore it differently. And yet, he was Amara's uncle. He was the man whose life had been borrowed and never returned. He was someone's son, someone's colleague, someone who was going to a relative's burial and had not come home. I cried for him, a stranger. Or not a stranger, the ghost who had been living in my marriage without my knowing. I thought about what he would think of all of it, whether he would be furious, whether he would understand, whether he had loved his brother enough in those last hours in the car to forgive what his brother had done with his name. I will never know. Here is where we are now. We are not divorced. We are not together. We exist in a space that the law has not yet fully named and that I have not yet fully decided. He sees Amara twice a week. He has applied, with the help of a lawyer, to have certain documents corrected, a process that is slow and complicated and involves more offices than I knew existed. His real name on her daughter's birth certificate will eventually replace the borrowed one. What it means for our marriage's legal status is a question I am still not ready to answer. Uju came to see me. She arrived one Saturday uninvited, which I resented. She is a woman with an angular face and the directness of someone who has spent years watching other people's mistakes compound. She sat in my kitchen and said, "I told him to tell you before it went anywhere. I told him on the third date." I said, "And he didn't listen." She said, "He was afraid to lose you." I said, "He lost me when he took his dead brother's name into a marriage ceremony and said, 'I do.'" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I have thought about many times since. "He did not steal from you. He stole from Kelechi first. Everything he did after, including loving you, was done in the debt of that first theft. He has been paying a bill he could never settle." I asked her to leave, but I have thought about it every day. There is a version of this story that wants to wrap itself up neatly, that wants the woman to decide, leave or stay, forgive or not, and then close the door on the mess. Life is not that story. Life is a Tuesday morning and a bottom drawer and a piece of paper that rearranges everything, and then the long, complicated, unscripted weeks that come after. I do not know what I will decide. I know what I feel, which is everything at once. Betrayed and sad and furious, and underneath all of it, something I am not yet ready to name. A man built a life on a stolen identity, and somewhere inside that stolen life, something genuine grew. Whether genuine things growing in fraudulent soil is a question I am still asking. What I know is this: my daughter calls him daddy with her whole body when she sees him. She does not know yet that the name she carries was borrowed. She does not know that somewhere in a cemetery in Port Harcourt, the man whose name is on her documents is buried. She does not know any of the things that will one day require explanation. She just knows his arms, his voice, the way he reads to her before sleep. Children love with a simplicity that adults have forgotten how to access, and perhaps that simplicity is in the end the only reliable compass any of us have. Perhaps. I am not yet sure. I should have been angrier, faster. I should have put him out that first night, or called the police, or done the clean, decisive thing that a woman with dignity does when she discovers she has been deceived at the foundation of her life. I know that. I know what the script says. But I have been sitting in the kitchen of a life I did not know I was building, and the light comes through the same curtains every morning, and my daughter's laugh sounds the same as it always did. And grief is not always a door that closes behind you. Sometimes it is a room you keep living in, rearranging the furniture, trying to make it feel like somewhere you can stay. Kelechi Enuachuku died on the Aba Expressway on the 14th of March 2019. He was 34 years old. He had a younger brother who survived and who did not know how to live with the surviving. I did not know Kelechi. I will never know him. But I am raising his niece, and his brother sits in my kitchen twice a week and reads her the same books in the same voice, and she reaches for his hand with the full weight of her trust. And I am still here, still in this room, still rearranging the furniture, deciding whether to stay. If this story sat inside you and didn't let go, that's why we're here. Subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that real life is almost always more complicated than anyone admits. We'll be back with another story that will find you exactly where you are. We always do.